I'm Edell Judith, and
Wayne.
and together we do a series of podcasts and webinars called Voices for the Future, in which we interview people who have something to say about where we're going in this world, how to navigate it, how to navigate the changes and the challenges we're facing, and bring us an inspiring voice from the future that gives us some hope and some inspiration about what we can create and where we're going. And so I'm going to begin with a paragraph here and then introduce our guest for today. Many people feel so overwhelmed by the complexity and immensity of the problems facing humanity that we have buried our heads in the sand, assuming there's nothing we can do. This program will guide us to look at some things we can do. Susan will show us how we can develop ourselves into the kind of humans who can handle inconvenient truths, ever-accelerating change, and conflicting worldviews. We can develop the new human capacities needed to develop relationships of trust and cooperation and make decisions for the good of the whole. That's our topic for today, and I'm delighted to introduce a longtime colleague of mine, Susan Campbell, who is a psychologist who has worked as a corporate trainer and relationship coach for 55 years. That's quite the track record. She's a former professor at UMass and frequent guest lecturer at Harvard, Stanford, UCLA, author of 12 books on the topic of relationships and human communication. Really good books. I have several of them. And she's featured in many popular magazines: New Woman, Psychology Today, Self, Harvard Business Review, 17. I wish I had this information when I was 17. Men's Health, New Age, Fast Company, and Yoga Journal. She has been featured on such national TV shows as CNN's Newslight, Good Morning America, the Dr. Dean Edell Show, and you train coaches and therapists throughout the United States and Europe. And I even had occasion to work with you at one time, and your work is great. So I've known Susan for probably 25 years, and just delighted that we've come around this bend of the journey to introduce you and have you on our program today as a voice for the future. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Edell.
So Michael's going to lead off and we'll be flying. And we just want to say, listeners, you can type questions into the chat. We will take questions at the end. We'll interview Susan on our own for a bit. But if you have questions that come, jot them down or put them in the chat, and we will open it to participant questions, a little before the end of the hour. Okay, so.
Yeah, so I'm interested in this term you use, Susan, the new human capacities. I get what you're saying, but I think it'd be great to talk about it. I know that you a while ago, you conducted a research study of these new human capacities needed to thrive in in our ever accelerating world. And especially nowadays with the amount of turbulence and chaos that for so many people is hard to just deal with. So let's talk about it. I want to just have you explain that more, that term, new human capacities.
So I did this research with leaders and managers back in the 90s, and it was particularly looking at change, like exponential change, adapting to keep up with new information, and conflict, change and conflict as two big challenges that we all need to learn to be with in some way. And one of the biggest things that I learned out of that, and I have a book that summarizes that research called From Chaos to Confidence, but the biggest impediment to being able to kind of surf change and adapt to ever-changing realities and to be able to hear points of view that are different from your own, the biggest impediment there was the fear of emotional pain, the fear of discomfort. Like I'll just rather avoid conflict. and become controlling, let's say a manager, become controlling with my people instead of listening to them. It's just too hard. I'm not that patient. And patience does have to do with handling a certain amount of discomfort in yourself. So I've written several books since the 90s when I did that research, and more, every book narrows it down a little bit more targeted to how do we deal with our fear of emotional discomfort. So that's what the new book From Triggered to Tranquil is about. Our biggest impediment to being prepared for like the world that we're entering is things like denial, trying to over control your environment, not really being able to feel what's going on in you or trust what's coming up in you and speak about it. And the reason we don't like speak about things a lot of times is fear of something bad happening that we won't be able to deal with. So the key is knowing that you can deal with more emotional pain than you thought you could if you update who you are, because so many of us have unhealed childhood wounds, and these really are sensitivities that we have to pay attention to. We have to kind of protect our tender like fears sometimes, but we don't have to live that way. We can bring healing to those tender fears and that childhood unfinished business. There are practices now that's what I'm teaching, practices now that help you expand your capacity for discomfort so that you can hear inconvenient truths and see the handwriting on the wall, let's say, before a crisis hits you and knocks you over. It's that type of thing that we're talking about here. Change and conflict are probably the two of the biggest challenges that the human of the future needs to be able to deal with.
So ability to sit with the discomfort in their body, in their vulnerability, and you're talking about this hitting leaders and managers as much as it hits couples and relationship, and you work with across the spectrum, right?
Yes.
What kind of commonalities are you finding in that?
Well, we all need emotional safety. There's a fairly recent bit of research that got a lot of publicity that Google did, this big research study about what creates high functioning teams. And the answer there was emotional safety. Now, I myself have been a couples therapist pretty much all my professional life. And the thing that couples need in order to even be able to speak difficult truths to each other so that they can be intimate, not sweep conflicts under the carpet. What they need is emotional safety. So that is across the board, whether you're in a work team or whether you're with your intimate partner. And then how do we create safety for ourselves? How do we help others feel safe so that we can have a world that's safe for differences and safe for each person's unique voice.
So how do people
which is again, obviously a challenge that's getting bigger and bigger, is dealing with differences.
So how do we create emotional safety for each other?
All right. First, we have to admit that we do have these fear reactions. We'll call them trigger sensitivities, getting your buttons pushed. And this is very personal. This is a very personal thing for people to realize, oh, I go around with a fear of rejection basically running me, or fear of criticism or fear of judgment basically running me. So I inhibit a lot of my genuine self-expression. So some of our listeners might find themselves in that. Or so you begin to notice what you don't allow yourself to feel or don't allow yourself to express as the kind of first place that begins the inquiry. Then you realize, oh, that's because I am really sensitive to certain types of looks, certain people saying certain words to me, and I limit myself. I do not have the capacity right now to deal with certain situations. So you would kind of admit that your world is shrunk into what we call the comfort zone. And if you're staying within that comfort zone, you aren't going to be able to learn from experience. So all humans are here. If we're evolving into better humans in the future, we're able to learn from our experience, to feel our feelings. But if you can't feel your own pain, you can't learn. So the how do we do it? We admit that we have trigger sensitivities. And so From Trigger to Tranquil gives you a number of activities that help you first accept. There's nothing shameful about being triggered. It's a reaction that's built in to the human nervous system. It's that amygdala that's always scanning for danger. Brain scientists call it a survival alarm system. So you begin to you have to first accept that this is human, this is normal. Getting triggered is a powerful thing, and you can't just think your way out of triggers. You actually have to do practices like yoga. Like I know you're a yoga teacher, Anodea, it's one of your gifts, and yoga practitioner among all your other gifts. And, yoga and these practices are intentionally stretching our comfort zone so that we can live more fully and feel more and hold a bigger charge and so forth. So first, accept that I've got these personality patterns that limit me, and we'll call them trigger sensitivities. Then I teach people what are the early warning signs? Think of a situation where somebody pushed one of those buttons and you felt like talking them out of it, or you shut down, or you really want to pursue the person, like don't go away from me. So when you have intense reactions of moving toward something, moving away from something, or just like shutting down, those are some of the reactive behaviors. So we learn to know, okay, where does my nervous system tend to go? Does it go to fight, flight, freeze, or something else? And then you look at, what thoughts do I tend to run? Oh, I tend to run judgmental thoughts toward other people when I'm triggered. And then like, why did that person talk to me that way? Why couldn't they have just said this? That would have worked for me. Those kind of judgmental thoughts, that means you're triggered. So people have to, there's a lot of triggering going on all the time with humans, and people don't even notice it because it's like your normal personality. So I'm trying to show people, okay, there's your trigger signature, and it has a number of elements. First, you accept that you get triggered. Then you look at, okay, these are the things that tell me I'm triggered. Then you learn how to pause and regulate your nervous system. And I'm, just every one of these steps has some activities involved. The next step is you feel tenderness toward whatever that trigger sensitivity is, that wish to run away or that wish to pursue, to get that other person to understand you. So you start to feel, well, I teach in the pause, in the pausing part, you begin to do some breath practices that open up a space for self-witnessing, because we really can't learn from experience if we don't have our witness activated. And people don't even know this. They don't even know what it means to have your witness activated. But that's the only way we can really help these scared parts, fear of rejection, fear of being judged, those scared parts. the only way we can really help them feel like, you know, there's nothing wrong with you for what you're feeling right now. So you kind of be with these emotions that are difficult. But when you have your witness activated and you know how to calm yourself and support yourself, then you're more able to feel all the way down. So you do this in different episodes. Every time your adult partner triggers you, or your kid triggers you, or your boss, you do a practice where you start with the immediate trigger sensations and feelings and thoughts, and then you just, okay, and now what's occurring? And now what's occurring? So you learn to hold space for yourself. You activate the good mother archetype. So this is like a total self-healing program. And in the process of being with your sensations and emotions, you're teaching that hurting part of you that emotional pain won't kill you. There's now a much bigger human here than when you were tiny, or when you were even 10 years old and you didn't have the resources to deal with some of those overwhelming and complex and hurtful things that might have happened to you in your childhood. So now you have more resources. Plus, if you do these practices, you have even more resources. So you learn all of these things that you can do to create a sense of internal safety. So, I mean, that's a very long answer to how, but, you know, it takes a while.
Yeah. Susan, I want to ask you, the name of our program tonight, you titled it Thriving in a World of Exponential Change and Conflicting Worldviews. And talking about triggering, it seems like, I mean, that's it's like a psychodrama playing across with this intense partisan divide we see. And it reminds me also of a saying, I can't remember the full quote, by Kurt Vonnegut, but he said something like, our world it runs like it's a high school class, like we're all in high school. So talking about, and it's great, your work, you've gone from the nitty gritty of dating and relationships to corporate business and the relationships of people working and so on. So how does this triggering play out in this psychodrama of exponential change and conflicting worldviews?
Yeah. So here we are, you know, like an ordinary human, and we're in this soup, first of all, of so many things changing, including a proliferation of worldviews and different memes and the culture wars. That's part of it, but also the climate crisis. You know, how are we going to adapt to this ever-changing reality? So we might get overwhelmed. So that's one uncomfortable feeling that we can start with. Another, and I'll talk to you about what you do with it. You start with an uncomfortable feeling, and it's going to be triggered by the world situation. I was doing a webinar day before yesterday about the polarization, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, about the COVID topic and how people were pro-vax, anti-vax, and how that's very triggering. But let's say we're sitting here as an ordinary human, kind of participating in this, and yet feeling kind of like the world around us is in some kind of conflict or chaos. It's almost like a child where the parents aren't getting along, and like if the family's not doing well and the parents are not doing well, we're not doing well. And we're all kind of connected together in this, wow, the collective is in chaos and I'm being affected all the time. So I think the way back, the way back to all of us getting more of our center and being able to make decisions from the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that can feel connected to others, feel empathy, collaborate, see if we can, you know, connect to that. This trigger work really helps. And you can even start with your trigger reaction to something like, we're all going to die, a thought like that, or nature's dying, or 25 more species are extinct and you feel pain there. Or in the webinar I did the other day, I asked people if they agreed, if they agreed with certain beliefs. And then I said, now who's gotten triggered? Just as I've been reading off these different, and people would show hands, and people's opinions were all over the place. But then I asked somebody, okay, what triggered you in there? And what triggered him was he perceived in one of these beliefs a attempt to control him. That's what he projected onto this statement. Somebody's controlling me. So I said, okay, let's start right there. Let's start with that fear story and feel into that, and then make some space with your breath, and then just inquire what's coming up. And what came up for him very soon was feeling controlled by his father, and actually feeling trapped. He would be in his room sleeping, and like after bedtime, maybe an hour after bedtime, and his father would come in and start yelling at him in a way that he felt like he was just pinned to the wall. He couldn't get away, and the father wasn't really making any sense. And so it was something that came out in kind of the COVID discussion, COVID culture wars discussion. People will pick some little thing, and I've seen this over and over. I could give you other examples, and there are examples in the book, but people will pick some little thing that all of a sudden has them taking a position and feeling against somebody else. And that's a moment for self-awareness and self-inquiry to once again open up a space of compassion for yourself. And he actually, once he got to process that a little more, he was able to hear the statement, the belief statement that was the statement that the other side on this divide would have made. He was able to hear that in a much more objective way. So the point is, anything that creates resistance to what is, or some kind of knee-jerk or powerful nervous system activation, or even like judgmental thoughts, as I mentioned before, that's a point to begin to go inward, to bring some tenderness, awareness, and acceptance to some of the emotional pain that's down there. And that teaches you not to be so afraid of emotional pain, not to be so afraid of listening to points of view that are different from your own. And it teaches you a little bit of humility too, because he got to see that, gee, I've always hated it when people say that, but now I understand a little more about the tender place in me that comes from.
Yeah, beautiful. But
Yeah.
isn't self-awareness and self-witnessing, isn't that most difficult to do when you're triggered? I mean, isn't the triggered state almost antithetical to being able to have any objective witness?
Absolutely.
When you're triggered, you're running. You can only see it one way.
That's right. So first of all, you have to believe that it is possible to stop that runaway freight train. In the book, I say, trigger reactions like a runaway freight train, and it's got so much more power behind it than any rational thought or any practice you learned in a book. But I'm amazed that when I kind of suggest, I've been suggesting that for many years now, when I kind of suggest that it is possible to notice your triggers. And I teach people how to do this trigger signature, and there's value there. They have to feel like there's some value to inquiring more deeply into themselves. So if you do some practices before you're in the triggered situation, it's sort of like I was a lifeguard and a swimming instructor, and we used to do this thing called land drills. You know, we'd practice certain moves and breathing and rescue things on the shore before we tried to do it in the water with a drowning person. So the land drills in this case are the trigger signature exercises, which have you remember like 5 or 10 different triggering events when you're not triggered. Remember them. Let's give yourself practice going into the memory a little bit, coming out. You do some of those. You also just from a cognitive observational place, what was the kind of thing that was triggering me? If you do 5 or 10 of these, you'll see certain types of things trigger you. Okay, so now when I go into that situation, I'll be a little more mindful. And then what does my mind do with that? Oh my gosh, I can't do anything right. You know, your mind might go there. Then you feel the feelings. I mean, you notice the feelings in this little exercise. You notice what goes on in your body, and you begin to get a snapshot of, oh, when these things are present, if any one of these things are present, I'm probably triggered. And that's when you're not triggered. You know, you do the exercises when you're not triggered to prepare you for when you are. And then pretty soon you learn, you really do. People can learn at least to say the word pause. That's really all I ask, is just say one word. Or maybe some people can't get a word out because it's just not their way. So you touch yourself in a certain place, or if you are in an intimate couple, maybe you have some hand signal. There's something simple that you actually can learn to do. And once you've paused, you've stopped that runaway freight train. And if you've practiced these like self-calming and grounding exercises outside of an actual trigger, you'll be able to bring them in more and more reliably. But I like to say to people, when you're first starting to learn these things, or even to learn to pause, you'll fail more than you'll succeed. But it is possible to learn, and I'm amazed. I actually, even though I'm a psychologist and I know people can change, I'm amazed that people can do this work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's the power of intent. You know, part of it's the power of intent, and part of it's the power of taking things in small doses and sort of practicing on land before you jump into the ocean.
Yeah. So I want to ask you also about the concept of someone's amygdala being hijacked, the amygdala part of the limbic system running our emotions, and that's where a lot of triggering happens. But you say that, like, as we see, like political conversations or in politics, interpersonal conflict, one person can intentionally hijack someone's amygdala. So can you talk about that?
A former president comes to mind. I'll just say that, at the risk of offending somebody, but Donald Trump was known for having that as one of his main negotiation strategies. You know, he tried like to see himself as a negotiator. I've been following him since before he wrote The Art of the Deal. So he wrote that back in the 80s. And his negotiation strategies are to get the other person off balance so you can get the upper hand. And then those of us who watched the news back in 2019, 2020 would see him insulting people and even implying that you could lose your job or something very bad could happen to you if you go in this direction. So I mean, that is scary. And those of us who grew up in homes where there was some kind of over-controlling, dominating authority figure, we might really have to do some inner work around the fear that that if you don't conform, something really bad is going to happen to you. So those kind of things will hijack your amygdala. But even using little buzzwords, using buzzwords when forget about the former president. People sometimes hijack each other's amygdalas without even realizing it too. But if we, I'll go there in a minute, but if we understand that there are some people who know how to intentionally hijack your amygdala, and you know this territory, you know the territory of triggers, and you understand how it works, and you can watch it happening inside of you, you are now armed against having somebody else intentionally hijack your amygdala. You're a little more well armed. If you had childhood wounds that sort of mimic that kind of authoritarian relationship where you're here and somebody else is way above you, then you might have to do quite a bit of inner work to be able to not have your amygdala get hijacked.
Yeah.
That's the kind of example where a couple might say, if you talk to me like that again, I'm filing for divorce, and then they trigger the abandonment issues. Or if you don't give me what I want, then I'm going to do this to you. Or, and those kind of threats trigger that amygdala response. One thing that I learned from you is that when one person is triggered, the other person automatically gets triggered, even if they think they're not. All you have to do is be talking to a triggered person and you're triggered. And I'm a person who, when I'm triggered, I tend to shut down more than get real active and angry. And I used to think, I'm not the one triggered here. You're the one being angry. And I'm just sitting here calmly holding myself together. And I had to learn, oh, I'm triggered too. I just handle it a different way. And it was very enlightening for me to understand that as a trigger, because I wasn't flying off the handle like this other person was, but I was equally triggered. And I noticed that if someone around me gets triggered, I can feel the charge immediately come up in my own body before I say a word. It's just, oh boy, I'm in danger. This person's triggered.
And it's wonderful that you and so many of us are able to realize that, okay, there's triggering in the space. Let me check in with myself, because maybe I don't immediately realize I'm triggered, but if there's like agitation in the space, like you're in a group and there's an argument between two other people and you're just witnessing, you can kind of get used to the idea that when there's triggering in the area around you, and now we also just talked about civilization, that you will have some level of nervous system activation that is not helpful, except that it is helpful because it helps you notice where your tenderness lies. And some of that tenderness just needs to be acknowledged and protected, like marking boundaries around people who speak with a very loud voice or use language that's offensive. So sometimes just knowing your sensitivities like that has you protecting yourself by marking boundaries. Other times it has you bringing compassion and healing work, inner healing work, like really bringing that good mother archetype love to this hurting inner child. So just knowing that there's so many opportunities for you to work your triggers. I'm really wanting people to get curious about their own triggers. It's nice to know also that when my partner's triggered, I'm probably going to be triggered too. So you don't just blame them. Hey, if you weren't so sensitive, we'd be fine. And actually, for people who are more like you and me, because I'm more like you and Edell too, I'm fine unless somebody else is mad at me, maybe that's true. Even I'm fine unless somebody, but I'm not going to grow very much as a human if I surround myself with people who only say nice things to me. So a lot of us in your audience are on a growth path, and we know that humans can evolve beyond self-protection and it's you and it's not me. But this is the methodology for growing beyond you versus me, and I didn't do it, you did it, you know, the
Right.
blaming mindset.
Yeah, right. It's another form of judgment.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting, you know, Susan and Edell talking about how your triggering shows up. That triggered behavior shows up in many different ways. It's not just someone yelling and screaming, stamping their feet. You know, some people will shut down, and maybe some people eat more than they should, or eat more junk food, or you know, any number of things. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways, and it might be good to list some of the ways that people, what they do when they get triggered.
Yeah, some of the subtler, let's start with some of the subtler ways.
Yeah.
You know, we all know that yelling and slamming doors can be a sign that you're triggered. But besides the why didn't you? One of the big ones is, let's say in an intimate partnership, but we could expand this to any relationship. You are feeling unattended to in your intimate partnership. You're not feeling loved and cared for, and you want some movement towards yourself, but you don't ask for it. See, that's part of your trigger reaction right there, is you're assuming that it's not safe. Yes. So just like not saying something when there's a real want there, that's a subtle one. But what more often happens is the person then will make up reasons why they're not speaking. Like they go, I know what the answer will be. I know that if I ask for sex or affection, the answer will be no. And that internal story itself, it's self-triggering, but it's also just evidence of you being triggered. And so you're just going around being a little pissy with your partner, you know, kind of holding back a little bit. And this is the way walls grow up between people. Just these subtle things that people don't address. So let's see what else. Laughing at somebody's joke. I mean, when you don't think it was funny, and you really feel kind of out of it because you didn't like what somebody said, but you laugh just to go along with the crowd. I mean, this could be you're triggered because you're afraid to stand out. You're afraid to just sit there with no laughing. So there's just so many ways. Talking somebody out of what they're upset by. Somebody's upset by you, and you go, you know, I don't remember it that way. In fact, here's how it went, and here's why you should not be upset with me. So certainly the first person who's upset is triggered, but you think that when you're trying to set the record straight or explain yourself, you think, well, that's a reasonable thing to do. That's what I should be doing. Mm-hmm. So those ordinary interpersonal types of, we could call them conversations that don't lead anywhere, those are all evidence of subtle triggering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those are good. I'm sure a lot of listeners will recognize, so they do one or the other of those, or yeah. Situation. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
Going back to, just came to my mind, going back to what we were talking about before about the hijacking of the amygdala, and you brought up Donald Trump, made me think about cults and how people get hijacked. There was a cult in my area that got national fame, notoriety. NXIVM was called, and
I saw that documentary.
Yeah, HBO had a whole like a 8-part series on it, and it was very. I watched the whole thing, one because I knew about it because I was in my area, and it was very instructive. The series about seeing the personal psychology, how people could fall under the sway of this charismatic leader, and they in one of the later episodes, they interviewed the New York Times reporter who broke the story about it. And he said, I'm not an expert, but it seemed like a lot of people are vulnerable. So would you say like people who fall into cults, fall under the sway of a charismatic leader, is that the hijacking of the amygdala also?
Well, whenever you're triggered, your amygdala is hijacked.
Yeah.
If we're saying, does the cult leader intentionally hijack people's amygdala? To some degree in this one, probably yes. And most people probably don't know the story, but the way I think of this, the cult leader, is you guys are sorely lacking in personal development. You know, you guys are damaged, and if you belong to us, we will fix you and everybody's going to be happy. That's kind of the way I saw it. So it's like shaming people into thinking they need to join up and give away their money to the cult and so forth. So that's one possibility. But generally with cults, it's more like your fear of not belonging, and nobody intentionally hijacked your amygdala. It just, you start to, you affiliate with this subculture and you start to get some of your needs met, and then things don't look right. Geez, abuse of power, other kinds of disturbing things.
Loss of freedom.
Yeah, a lot of these cults have, the rules don't apply to the leader, but they apply to everybody else, like sexual freedom and stuff like this. So I don't want to put all cults in the same lump, but for many of us, we will join a cult or a subculture with a genuine, positive, self-respecting intent. And then once you start to see things that don't work for you, you don't speak up because you are afraid of not belonging. So that's one of the core things that people that are so sensitive for people. That's what triggers people. Two main things trigger people nowadays, because it used to be a tiger jumping out of the bush that might kill you, but it's now our dangers that create this amygdala hijacking. Because see, you can hijack your own amygdala. That's what happens more often, by your own habits, running your same self-protective habits and seeing the situation as if there's mortal danger, when it really may have been mortal danger when you were 7 years old. And so we need to learn how to tend to that part and not make that part feel rejected, because you've kind of already rejected that part. So you bring that back, and then you're more resourceful in confronting whatever you need to confront. But this, the danger now is disconnection from somebody that I love or depend on or need. And, the closer you are to somebody, like your kid or your mate, those are the toughest triggers. That, or separation from the group, not belonging. So it's human disconnection that is threatening to people nowadays. And at least that's the shorthand. They're little, sometimes it's like your self-image, your self-concept got threatened, but that's because somebody else is seeing you one way and you want them to see you a different way. So all of these modern day amygdala hijacker events have to do with disconnection. So I think the cult thing, the biggest amygdala hijacker in a cult situation is the fear of not belonging. But there is this other sort of a little bit Donald Trumpish thing, like in Nixium, which is if you leave the cult and talk about us, bad things might happen to you. I think there was some of that went on.
Oh yeah, they did the bad things. They took the person to court and then sued their pants off.
Yeah, threat of retribution, punishment. Most kids were punished at some point, and so the threat of retribution is very real. So I'm going to ask you a harder question. on January 6th, we know we had this insurrection at the Capitol with a mob of people who you've got to say were triggered.
Yes.
To be able to go in and say, I'm going to kill somebody for my belief and my story that I've told myself about the election being stolen, or having been revved up by the crowd before, and by Trump himself before they went down there. But in that kind of situation, you're not going to find people that are going to stop and do some self-awareness. And they're being fueled on by the ones around. Someone might have not been violent themselves, but they see other people doing it, and it unleashes their inhibition about their own violence. That, oh, well, if he's breaking a window, so I can. I mean, what can you do with a crowd like that has obviously become dangerous because of their triggers?
Yeah. Well, we do need more leaders, and that could have been anybody, but they have to have a certain consciousness where somebody would come on the loudspeaker and actually calm the crowd down in some way. Oh, that level of consciousness, I think, is still evolving. I mean, Barack Obama had some qualities of being able to appeal to the we. But he was just very smart man and understood human dynamics. I think the level of consciousness that could calm that crowd, I haven't seen that yet. But we should all aspire to becoming that kind of person who could say, wait, let's step back together at what's happening there. But it's hard when people are at such different levels of consciousness in the mob. But even if you had like a critical mass of 30% of the people who could hear that leadership voice, there's a possibility. But I agree with you, at the current tools and resources that we have, probably not. But I can imagine lots of wonderful things that leader would do, or those leaders, or a core leadership team. They might, before something like Martin Luther King was great. Before you go into something, you do a lot of preparation. You learn how to protect your body. You learn how to forgive the enemy. Okay, so he came from a Christian background, which is Jesus Christ. Love everyone, love your enemies. So there's so many different worldviews right now. It's really hard to find the leader that will speak to the whole. And there may be enough of a feeling of collective crisis brewing that will force more of us to emerge who speak for the collective and can speak a language that touches people who are even on different sides. I think all the work that a lot of good organizations are doing right now that have to do with listening, with empathy to the other side, that develops this capacity, as does some of the tools that I'm teaching in my work.
Yeah. And
I wish I had a better answer for the January 6th.
No,
It's already happened, but
yeah, it's still raw. Barbara Marx Hubbard famously said crises are evolutionary drivers. Right. And I think, like you used that term, new human capacities, I think those are the evolutionary drivers to develop those new human capacities. And you mentioned a little earlier, Susan, about that we won't evolve or bump up if we're just surrounded by people who aren't pushing us. So that's, that's part of that evolutionary driver, that getting to that new human capacity. So it would have been good, as you say, if someone for that January 6th insurrection, there was someone who was helping to guide the crowd and channeling their anger in a more constructive way.
You know, on a simpler level, a question that I get a lot from people when I, try to share practices that you can do and all that, and they'll go, well, if I suggested that to my partner, they would just fly off the handle. What do you have when you have a partner who is not willing to look at themselves, not willing to do any practices, that says, well, this is all your problem, and it has no capacity for self-reflection. That's even on a one-to-one, or someone in your team or your group.
Yeah.
How do you work with that?
Start with doing your own inner inquiry about what bugs you about that person.
Mhm.
And maybe what bugs you is we're not watching the same movie, and I love you so much, and we seem like we're operating in different realities. And this is because you've already done your inquiry, so that it's very triggering to be seeing a different reality with the person that you live with every day. And so you speak from your heart what you discovered in your inquiry, but it could be something like that. And once you're not being righteous over the other person, or I'm right and you're wrong, not threatening, sometimes you can touch them that way. Otherwise, you might have to up the ante and use some threats. like, this relationship is not working for me, and I need us to get some couples therapy and learn about this and that. If we're gonna stay relating, if we're gonna stay married, or whatever the other thing is, if you're gonna still be working as my vice president, in a business, sometimes you do have to, I call it threats, but I used to do a program for corporations called Dealing with Difficult People. The first is the personal direct, you just speak from your heart. The second level of dealing with difficult people is the strategic indirect, which I don't think works for intimate relationships, but it can work in a classroom with a teacher, give special chores, and to the most acting out bully in the class, make him the teacher's pet, strategic thinking like that. Or finally, threats. And sometimes, threats is a lousy word because I don't want anyone to feel threatened, but you do need to sometimes say, this is a requirement for being in a relationship with me. I need to be able to talk to you on this level. And I care about you. I care about our relationship. And I've made an appointment with this couples counselor, and you will be there. Or,
Well, doesn't a threat trigger the amygdala?
Keep it friendly, it's better.
Yeah, because I would think a threat can trigger the amygdala.
Yeah. I used to call it threats just to make a joke, because it was a big audience. But no, then I would explain it. It's not really, you don't want to really threaten.
Yeah.
But you want to put some teeth in your requests sometimes, especially if there's addictive behavior involved. I've found that with, acting out addicts and you're the spouse, you have to have consequences. The other word would be consequences.
Yeah.
That's a friendlier word.
Yeah. Tough love. Yeah. We do have a question that came in. Marie says, Martin Luther King, because you mentioned him, also relied on the teachings of Gandhi. How do we deal with the pro-life people who are now furious with Biden and his policies and completely ignore Trump's behavior in the riot? What is their real trigger? Thanks so much.
Okay, now, who's real trigger? Read that again, because I missed who they are.
Let's see. How do we deal with the pro-life people who are now furious?
Okay.
And I think here's an issue on both sides. We've got the Texas thing that just was, restricting any abortion for women at all, and the $10,000 bounty. And then we've got the anti-abortion, and then now the federal judge overthrew that. And so we're at this really
right in the middle of that.
And abortion is a very charged issue for a lot of people.
Yeah. So what's the, what's the trigger for the pro-life person, I think is what this person just asked. or what could be their fear. When we say trigger, we really mean what are they afraid of? And honestly, it could be anything. You could say, what's the trigger for the pro-life person? What's the trigger for the pro-vax person, the anti-vax person? You could say anything, and it would still be something that the other, there's something the other is doing or saying that threatens you could almost say my very existence, but it's usually some kind of identification, some subculture identity. If that's threatened, that's almost like yourself is being threatened, or if your values are being threatened. But where people's positions come from, like the term pro-life, we'll just use it that way, where people's positions come from are not necessarily triggers. They can come from just your conditioning, your childhood conditioning, your need to belong. You don't want to be too different from the people in your family and all of that. So the need to belong, if for any reason, another person who says a woman's body and what happens to a woman's body is that woman's choice, pro-choice. If that triggers a pro-life person, what's it feel like? What's the story? We have to actually talk to each individual person and find out from them what that is. And so, the questioner, the first place to inquire is, what gets to you about that pro-life position and that law that Texas is trying to put forth here, Governor Abbott and so forth? What gets to you about that? Where does that hit home for you? And you don't arrive at this by thinking about it. You arrive at it by, man, when I first heard that on the news, this was my thought, this was my feeling, this was my body sensation. Let me see if I can calm myself down and make enough space so I can see what else is there for me in this issue.
I imagine some of the pro-life position is, oh, well, this is a life that doesn't have any say, the fetus in the womb doesn't have any say, and that triggers a vulnerability as a child when you didn't have a say over what was happening to you. And so you want to protect everything vulnerable that doesn't have a say, and you can't see the larger picture of the woman has 3 kids already and can't afford to feed them, and
that's a good one.
Has to carry the rapist baby, they can't see that piece because they can only identify with this vulnerable thing that wasn't protected.
Yeah, and if they can get to that as their trigger, if they're humble enough to want to do this kind of work, they can bring some tenderness to that version of themselves that didn't have any say. On my COVID polarization call a couple of days ago, a woman who was anti-vax reported very similar to what you're just saying about the pro-life. I'm not having any say. I want my voice to be heard. People are telling me how far, she honestly said stuff like this, but it was easy to empathize with. She said things like, people are telling me how far I need to stand from other people. People are making too many decisions for me. So it's exactly like what you were saying. So it can come up around many, many issues. And she said, I just want my voice to be heard. And then I guided her to feel that more deeply.
And then another unfortunate aspect of this cultural divide over these issues is that there's a certain class of politicians, demagogues, who use these as wedge issues to get people riled up, to kind of trigger them to get all worked up over this as a mechanism to get them to vote against their best interest, to support these demagogues, as opposed to us finding the common ground to heal this divide in the country. So it's another way of triggering people.
Yeah, and as long as people are in, their reactions are coming from that survival reaction, the amygdala, you are not able to make good decisions or process data objectively. You need to be able to, it's in everyone's best interest, no matter where you are on the political divide, to be able to get your higher brain back online so that you can collaborate and reason with people, unless you are a demagogue who thrives on real chaos. Steve Bannon comes to mind. Maybe, there are people who have nothing to lose because, they're so rich and insulated.
Yeah, and Trudy makes a good point. She put into the chat box, discerning when to talk and when to walk, at least in the moment, until another calmer time. So.
Good. Yeah, and I always recommend pause at the first sign of triggering and don't try to talk, because everything you say, you're not going to be making sense. You're going to say things that you regret, but you're also just not coming from a very powerful place in yourself. Because when you're triggered, you see like this many options. And then when you calm yourself and you get back into the prefrontal cortex, you see a lot more options and you're more empowered. It's really feeling powerful in this moment is something that we do have the power to do for ourselves.
And then another thing that Susan, I'd like to ask, a lot of people want to stay informed and watch the news, various different channels. But then the news can trigger people, just since their aim is to get viewers and sell ads, and so they get people riled up. So what do we do about that if we want to stay informed? But
I turn the volume down sometimes. People are getting, some of these newscasters are, really, I love some of these newscasters, but they kind of really amp it up sometimes. So I just turn down the volume just for self-protection. People are trying to win eyeballs now. It's so much about economics. So if we can understand that the media is trying to get our eyeballs, and there's bad actors out there who might be trying to, manipulate us in a bigger way, like to collectively dive off the cliff like a bunch of lemmings. If we can understand that there are these forces, we can empower ourselves to meet these forces more consciously.
Exactly. Yeah. William says, Susan, you are so right on the brain science and the need for all of us to find our authentic self and the true center of our held positions and reactions. Yeah. So if you were this leader, what would you say?
Well, I would say I'm a human, and I want to hear what you guys need and feel. So it would take a while. It wouldn't just be me speaking at a January 6th rally. I don't see any one thing that a leader could do right now, but you can build relationships with everyone, listen to everyone. And it's so amazing how when people feel heard, that is kind of like co-regulating. Co-regulating means helping another person calm their nervous system down. So just going, and so let's say I'm in a big group, but this would take the big group a lot of time to process different things. But I've led big groups where there's a lot of conflict, and just like, okay, let's listen to this person. Let's tune into this person. Let's feel where they're coming from. What's their need? And maybe I'll interview the person, then I'll tell the person what comes up in me. And sometimes what does come up in me is, I want to know you, and there's something in the way here. Let me look at what's in the way in me from hearing you. And I'll just process something of my own in the moment. The way you're talking to me is, I'm just making this up now, is the way my big brother used to talk to me. So let me just calm myself down. And then, could you say that again, please? Behaving in an open-hearted, respectful way that is curious. That's the model that builds enough relatedness for people to have any influence on each other. But building relationship with somebody who has a worldview that's very different from your own, that's going to take some practice. I do that. I ask people where their opinions come from and that sort of thing. And I can find a little bit in me of, yeah, I really feel you, and I can see how you could think and feel that way. And I'll say, and I have more growing to do too, because sometimes I just get exhausted. I don't have the patience and the bandwidth yet to keep listening and keep dialoguing. But that is what the new human is going to need, is a lot more patience, a lot more ability. Freud called it the ability to bind tension. You and I, Anna Day, would call it hold a charge, the ability to hold a bigger charge, to hold more of the life force, even when it's conflictful. That's evolution. And the evolutionary driver is all the chaos and the multiple crises that we're going through. It's starting with whatever you're feeling and finding out what somebody else is feeling, and just trying to get to know each other's realities.
Yeah. Beautiful.
There's been a number of organizations that are bringing people together in the political realm. The Stanford Center for Deliberative Democracy, they've done a program, Americans in One Room, where they brought people bearing stripes together for a few days. Living Room Conversations, Joan Blades is another one, and some other organizations. So yeah, we need a lot more of that, a lot of healing.
Those braver angels, empathy circles. There's an awful lot of that going on. And I used to do tea groups for business organizations back in the 60s and 70s when the Vietnam War was going on. And we had the Hawks and the Doves back in the Vietnam War. And but these tea groups were like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. with the same group of people in a room. You break for lunch. Sometimes you go to a little lecture, but basically you're just interacting in the here and now with these strangers. And after about 3 days, what starts to come up is the hawk-dove issue, their differences, but they've already gotten a heart connection with each other. And then they're able, and this is, groups of like 12 people with 2 facilitators, okay? But this model was really nice for showing that an intensely polarized group, and almost always it was sort of half and half, because this was corporate America. This wasn't, New Age California. And pretty soon people would say, how can you work for a company that makes bombs and warplanes? And the other, but I really want to know what it's like for you. And the other person would say, now I'm feeling shame and, I'm feeling anger. But then, pretty soon they get to be able to say, I have conflict about that too. It's like once it's safe enough, people aren't so black and white in their thinking. It's like we hold on to these rigid positions, partly because we need this identity so much to bolster us up against some imagined enemy who's trying to tell me what to do. So there's a softening that we can create by creating more safety with one another, whether it's groups, families, organizations. But it does take the willingness to be engaged and listen.
Mhm. Here's a great question from Paul. He says, my thoughts about why would anyone want a president that could trigger so much anger and chaos in this country may have come from my own childhood of anger and chaos. So my strong reaction to this situation may indeed have its roots in my history as a child. Yeah, well, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you're going to change your mind once you've inquired and you see that, yes, it is part of your emotional wounding that has you react so strongly. But once you're informed about this strong reaction to authoritarian leadership, let's say, once you're more informed, you're actually going to be able to bring that childhood wound in as kind of a current passion. You know, I am passionate about this. I've gone through that, you know, but you don't say it in those words, but you're more whole and informed around your own motivation when you do make a political stand, let's say.
Yeah. So also we have questions that came in the question and answer box. One from Grace. She asked, can you say more about why and how people from punitive families are more likely to, if they're not become the boss, or quick to be a follower? Is it that they see a place in a hierarchy of dominance with scapegoats? That you follow that?
No, but I'm making up some of my own pictures listening to that. Punitive families, this person said. So,
and then stories about scapegoats.
So somebody, yeah. So what comes to me right away is conflict isn't dealt with very well in a system. So you're going to have scapegoats. See, that's what breeds scapegoats, is people don't know how to deal with their differences. So what I get, punitive family is there's an imbalance of power and somebody has all the power to be the punisher and the other people are more like the recipients of the punishment. And then some of them are going to be the scapegoat. Some of them might turn out to be the rebel. Some might be the invisible child. If I just sort of look at a typical family where there is a dysfunctional dynamic. But I don't, I forget the other key words there that this person, throw me those key words again. Scapegoat was.
People from punitive families, they could become quick to be a follower, and it's that they see a place in a hierarchy of dominance with scapegoats.
So I'll just take off because I don't truly understand where the questioner is coming from. And as soon as I say this, maybe I'll ask the questioner to clarify, like, did this help, or can you restate your question now that I've said this? So you come from a punitive family, you're set up to want to either like kind of submit, be a sheep, don't rock the boat because, I'll get punished. Or you might do this thing that in social psychology we call identify with the aggressor. You might find that the best defense is a good offense. So you in your social relations become the punitive one.
Yeah.
As again, all of this is protection. All of this is different. People have their protection patterns. One protection pattern is I'll go invisible and I'll just be a sheep. Another person's protection pattern is I'll be a dominant. And I've worked with a lot of CEOs, and a lot of CEOs have real difficulty not getting their own way. And that's kind of a fragile personality structure, just as an example. So let's put it back to the person. Thank you for that question. Is there more that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, great. Yeah, Grace, feel free to put anything else in the chat box. Might be easier there, or for any more on that. But yeah, as I said earlier, Susan, what a world of psychodrama that plays out. I mean, it's underlying all this political turmoil is this psychological triggering and turmoil and psychodrama. And it's just mind-boggling.
It's the soup we swim in right now. Is people are going around feeling slightly unsafe much of the time, especially when we go into a new social situation where we don't know who's who. But you know, we're scared of being close to people because we might get COVID. You know, I mean, this is really quite a volatile time.
Yeah. And you know, with conspiracy theories, they tend to have a common theme that there is some nebulous dark force that you can't see or really point to that has it in for you and is doing things to you that you don't know is being done. That seems to fit like a lock and a key to people's, you know, childhoods, especially things like sexual abuse, you know, where there's some kind of hidden dark force that's coming at you that you can't talk about. And it seems to be, you know, such a projection of that. But the conspiracy theories seem to fit right into that. You want to say something about that?
Well, let's
QAnon and
into the mind of, you know, I mean, there's multiple different kinds of conspiracy theories, and but let's say the ones that are what they usually say about Trump, unhinged from reality, as far as most of us, you know, most of the collective would agree. They're just fanciful. But what is the need for safety in that person? See, I don't want to take away anybody's humanity, even if their way of processing information has become unhinged from what we ordinarily think of as reality. So a lot of it can be somebody, you alluded to it, somebody's doing something to me, and I'm not going to let anything get put over on me again. So I'm going to notice all the little signs that mean something. You know, I'm going to connect the dots. And it's a sense of getting power again. Oh, if I can see things that other people don't see, it can give us a sense of, you know, kind of a false sense of power, but it's basically like the person whose amygdala is on high alert all the time because you did come from a dangerous family situation maybe, and you really know that people can be against you. So that kind of person where there was some danger to their being, they may actually have a kind of a valid point there. You know, you got to watch out because not everybody has my interests. But if the person was going to get really internally prepared for a world where not everybody has your best interests, you might want to spend your time clarifying your own inner ability to process information, like looking at your filters and your biases and how you make sense. And your triggers are one of the filters. That I mean, none of us are going to be good critical thinkers or good thinkers at all if we aren't aware of our biases and our filters. And one of the biggest filters, of course, is group identity. So, you know, QAnon gives you a group identity, but if you can't step outside your filters and go, oh, I'm filtering everything through they are not trustworthy, they are coming to get us, you know, make sure you have enough guns or whatever.
They are shipping children in the drawers of bureaus coming from the furniture store, you know.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why certain little pieces of those, like the QAnon stuff, certain little pieces attract some people and then other little pieces attract other people. But I think it might have something to do with early sensitivities that you don't even know you had. So the more you're aware of the sensitivities that create your cognitive filters and biases and make you want to hold on to certain group identities rather than others, all of that, the more aware of your own motivation, the more powerful human being you're going to be.
Grace, I think she clarified her question about scapegoating and people from punitive backgrounds. She said, I was talking about people following authoritarian nationalist populist leader type, potentially totalitarian leaders in our world today. So kind of what we've been talking about, people being followers from a cult leader, demagogue, politician, populist type.
Yeah, we might be more susceptible to following that kind of a leader if we've grown up in punitive families where you kind of learned not too much not much self-expression is very safe.
Yeah. And this has been very instructive, Susan. We have a couple more chat questions as we are probably winding down. Paul had asked that he's had different bosses throughout his career, and since very little training was involved to prepare them for their job, his thoughts are that they organically function from their family of origin.
Yeah. Any group situation, and it's great to be aware of that, Paul. Any group situation that is a kind of coherent group that you go to work every day with the same people, even if you're the boss, groups mimic your family of origin and the dynamics that the role you played there and the dynamics that were there. And so it's good to do a little, if you're working on a team or in a group, or you're in any kind of a group, good to reflect on how it was in your family of origin, and if anything in the group that you're currently in has echoes of that for you.
Then I had another question come in the question box. Or you want to read something from the chat box, Anadea?
Sure. Well, Marie says with medicine now, it seems very complicated sorting out how big pharma is profiting from one mode of treatment without ignoring where they may also be right at times. What is problematic now is all the focus on the vaccine and not on living healthy lives. How do we find balance here?
Yeah. When I listed out I listed out the other day when I did this COVID polarization group on the yes, the vaccine is necessary, I'm going to get the vaccine, or I got the vaccine, no, it's not. One of the polar themes was big pharma. Well, this vaccine does seem to have some statistical value in that all the states that have a higher vaccination rate have a lower COVID infection rate. Okay, and so people go there. And then on the other hand, well, big pharma has been known to alter data, to lie, to suppress data that doesn't fit with their agenda. And so there's really, you can get stuck in, well, corporations lie, or corporations are only for their own profit. You can get stuck in that side, or you can forget that there's a lot of what a pharmaceutical company will put out that just because everybody agrees with it doesn't mean it's true. What are you going to do with all that? You look at where you get triggered by the other position.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm doing with everybody on this call, is try to be curious about yourself and what types of belief statements trigger you and make it hard for you to then be really open-minded and curious, because you get yourself stuck in a position.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It tends to be this blanket, all pharma is bad, therefore all medicines are bad. People do that with Western medicine because it's, there's so many things wrong with it, and yet it does some things really well. And then, all not taking any vaccine is, it's when we get into the black and white thinking. Yeah. Well, I think we have a couple more comments coming in, but I think we're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon.
Yeah, this obviously it's very stimulating. I might have to have you on again, Susan, because this is such an important topic.
Yeah, I'm just sort of reading through. I think these are a little too long to take at this late time in the any parting words that you want to give to people and about the future, since this is Voices from the Future and you're talking about developing these human capacities. So with these human capacities, where can we go in the future?
Well, we're all part of the solution here. You might think that my little personal work, personal awareness does not affect the collective. But the more I study this trigger work, the more I see that if I'm walking down the street triggered, somebody else is going to feel less safe. If I'm behaving in a certain way, it's like if I'm behaving in a friendly, open-hearted way, that's going to be connecting, and maybe we can even listen to lack of agreement, somebody who does not see your own way. So kind of remembering that the way you conduct your life and your awareness does affect everyone. And I think just that's really what we can do. We can't change what happened on January 6th, but we can change ourselves by just becoming more knowing of ourselves. When I say change, just self-knowledge is incredibly useful for the collective.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. Where can people find out more about you? And can you hold up a cover of your book a more recent book?
This is the book that I'm working from when I talk about doing that trigger signature work and inner inquiry, self-compassion work, from triggered to tranquil. My website is susancampbell.com. And if you go to susancampbell.com and subscribe to my monthly newsletter, you're going to hear about the free Tuesday morning, first Tuesday of the month group coaching calls that I do. And I'm going to continue that COVID polarization conversation Tuesday. I think it's November 2nd, if that's a Tuesday. So I'm going to continue that because it was so rich this past Tuesday and we got so much out of it that I think it's a good design, and it helps people look at their triggers around common polarities that we're dealing with today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And your newsletter and Susan's newsletter, I get it. You've got a lot of juicy tidbits in there. Each one is like a little lesson, so it's really good. Any last words, Michael?
No, this was great. I mean, yes, this is great. Really important work that you're doing, Susan, and really important information you're sharing with us. And it kind of reminds me of the old saying, the personal is the political. I mean, underlying all our dynamics of politics and relationships and everything is that personal, and as you point out, how we get triggered or how we don't, our self-awareness, and how we can navigate skillfully through life or not.
And that's really what it is, about navigating through these challenging times to develop powers that we hadn't developed before and become more human.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Susan. It was really valuable.
Thank you. And there's a lot of appreciative comments in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciating it.
Yeah.
So continue your wonderful work. You've been doing this for so long and you're still trooping. So hats off to you.
Thank you. It was a wonderful conversation, both of
All
you,
right.
Edell and Edell.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Great. Yeah. Peace out.
And next time,
Oh, that's a good segue, because the next program we're doing is really a logical extension of what we're talking to tonight. We're going to be with David Nevins, who's the founder and chairman of the board of the Bridge Alliance, which is an organization that is an umbrella organization of about 100 different groups that are working at bridging the political divide in this country. Too bad I couldn't get David on this call just to listen, because this is like I said, what we'll talk with David is really just logically extending from what we're talking tonight here, what we did talk about. Yeah.
all right, great. So tune in, and that will be on October 28th.
Yeah, at 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay, yeah. We'll see you all there. And thank you again, Susan Campbell. You can find her at susancampbell.com, and her book is From Triggered to Tranquil.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.